Diamonds to Pebbles. Chapter 7. The next big event arrived. This time, it was a moonlit walk in the gardens, as Jade suggested. Through the time that had passed, Evelyn heard numerous rumors from the ladies staying at the castle. Most of them talked about her. They discussed how indecent it was for the starry-dressed woman to come barging into Steel King Artus's heart. All except Jade, who hid a smile every time the topic was mentioned. Meanwhile, her relationship with Artus had grown a bit awkward, especially when it was just the two of them. Neither she nor Artus made unnecessary comments. It was all business, which was how it should have been from the beginning. The plan they established for the night began with Evelyn preparing the soup before attending the event. Artus wanted as much time with her as possible, so he thought he'd remove her rush of getting back to the kitchen. He had been relying on his mother's advice the past week as he tried to understand Evelyn's situation. Snow had kindly instructed her son to give Evelyn space and to not take offense as the girl was navigating complex terrain. When it was time to make the soup, Chef Reuben watched Evelyn carefully. He gasped when he noticed she added more milk than he did, along with a tad of sugar. The current challenge placed in front of Evelyn was adding the small spinning wheel without Reuben noticing as he observed her every move. Finally, she came up with a plan that would pry Chef Reuben's eyes away for a moment. She kindly asked, "Can you get out the garlic?" "I'm afraid there still isn't enough." "You add more garlic, too?" he asked, amazed at how skilled she had become in whipping up the king's favorite soup and improving the taste. She nodded with a smile. He playfully bonked her nose with his wooden spoon. She laughed, wondering where he had been all of her life. He had become her perfect father figure as her real one had melted away from the depths of her heart. Reuben turned his back to her and headed to the cupboard to get the minced garlic. While he was distracted, Evelyn pulled out the next golden object, the spinning wheel. Quietly to herself, she said, "To the making of our thread." Then she hid it in the soup at the very bottom. Once Chef Reuben had the dash of garlic they needed, she sprinkled it in, and the soup was prepped. She placed the lid on top to keep the warmth inside. Then, to keep it even warmer, they set it close to the fire. Evelyn looked over at Chef Reuben and said, "You'll keep an eye out for young girls in starry dresses, won't you?" He smiled, "No ring shall get in this batch of soup. Now, hurry along, we wouldn't want you missing that event." She nodded to him and headed off to her room, then she remembered a significant detail. Chef Reuben wasn't supposed to know that she was attending the event. She slowly turned back to him. "That is an assignment only the king, his family, and myself know about." "How did you?" "Don't worry, I'll make sure I doze off a couple of times." "I never saw you put that little spinning wheel in there." Evelyn's golden eyes widened. Then they softened as she ran to hug him tightly, her hood falling off the top of her head. He laughed fondly and kissed the top of her sunray hair. "I always knew Little Bear was a beauty. Now go dazzle the king once more," he said, pushing her off like a bird taking flight. A newfound excitement ran through her stomach as she set her coat aside and took the enchanted shell out. She gave it a good rub until she no longer wore her uniform. This time, she stood in the white mermaid dress, translucent fabric blossoming out behind her waist, and she swore it glowed blue in the moonlight. Her fingers pressed against the diamond jewel on her forehead. Her mother had worn this jewel on her wedding day. It was always meant to be passed down to Evelyn, but she hated the context in which it was given. After a collective moment, she rushed through the servant passages to reach the gardens. When she came to the end, she cracked the secret door open. Many people would be roaming the gardens this time around, which meant she had to be cautious. When she saw no one in sight, she entered the surprisingly quiet garden. She roamed around, noting the fountains were running and the garden was more illuminated than usual. Above her, the moon glowed, casting her shadow down on the bricks she walked along. Finally, she spotted a group of people walking around with drinks in their hands as they viewed the plants and the moon. Then they turned in her direction, wonder-struck by her dress and appearance, as well as what was behind her. Soon, she, too, felt the presence behind her as his steps made soft thumps on the brick. Evelyn whirled around and dipped into a curtsy. Artis's pleased chuckle was unmistakable. As she lifted her head, she noticed how his sparkling blues seemed to dance in the moonlight. He gazed upon her, happy he had been able to predict her whereabouts. "I knew you would come. And look at that. You're putting the moon to shame. Will you walk with me?" "I believe you owe me for running off like you did," he said, extending a hand out to her. This time, she took it without hesitation. "I'm deeply sorry for that, Your Majesty. I was overwhelmed and needed to attend to something before the night was over," she answered as they began to walk. He smiled as he leaned closer to her. Her eyes landed on his lips. She quickly glanced at a bed of roses, berating her mind for jumping yet again to the idea of a kiss. At least she didn't cause a stir this time around. "Yes, the golden ring in my soup." She blushed. "Well, I wasn't planning to stick that in your soup when I arrived, but everything fell into place. It's hard to explain all that happened. I hope I didn't cause any trouble." "Oh, you certainly have caused a lot of trouble," he said, his tone serious, but his smile indicated amusement. "I haven't been able to think about anything else, so you must take this next question seriously." Evelyn glanced back at him. "What?" He pushed back the hair covering her ear. There was a tumble in her stomach and a warmth that spread throughout her body. "Are you going to leave behind a slipper next?" She stepped back and huffed. "Your Majesty. I promise I'm not trying to replicate Queen Ella. Everyone should make their own story. Fall in love their own way, not copy off another's." Pure, delightful laughter exploded from him. It was the happiest she had seen him. "Oh, it is just a joke. But please. I want to know as much about you as I possibly can." Evelyn took this as her chance to turn to deeper conversations. She wanted to establish trust and prepare for King Nuno's inevitable visit. Would Artis stand by her when her father came? There was no doubt in her mind that others aside from Snow and Rosemary knew her identity. Somehow, her father would hear about the girl in the starry dress and come running. "Before I do tell you anything, sire, I would like to ask something of you first," she said, stopping their stroll. "Anything." Evelyn smiled at his short response and bit her lip for a moment, then she asked him in a shaky voice, "What do you think of me? Am I just a distraction for you? A source of amusement? Because I need to clarify that my proposal was serious." Then, to her surprise, he squeezed her hand. "I understand. And while you amuse me, I am not a man who courts a woman for the fun of it. You are beautiful, intelligent, and brave. I see a woman fighting for a better future while a haunting past replays in her mind. I have also noticed how gentle your touch is, so no, you are not a distraction. I have been considering your request every day, but I still need the whole story." At the last part, his smile faded as he waited patiently for her to speak. Wordlessly, they resumed their walk, getting further away from listening ears. Once Evelyn felt safe, she took a deep breath. "As you wish, Your Majesty, and thank you for being willing to listen." "Of course, but my lady, can I hear you say Artis?" he asked nonchalantly, like it wasn't a big deal to address a king by his name. Evelyn blushed, wondering how she could play ignorant the next day while serving him breakfast. But his name easily slipped across her lips, Artis. They paused once again in their walk. Artis hadn't expected the word to send a jolt through his body. He had asked a few ladies in his life to address him by name, but never had it been said so sweetly before, aside from the gentle whispers of his mother when he was younger. He knew then he had stumbled entirely off the edge and fallen into Evelyn's embrace. He was going to support her no matter what her hidden circumstances were. Whether it be a family dispute or a conflict involving the entire ocean. His feelings were no longer a curiosity but the traces of a blossoming love. "Please, Evelyn. Tell me what's wrong," he said her name although he had intended for her to say it. Evelyn swallowed while her grip on his hand loosened. She hadn't expected him to use her real name despite knowing he knew who she was. She pursed her lips, pondering if she really could tell him who she had run from. "If you know my name, then you must have heard of my supposed kidnapping?" He nodded but remained silent. The rest of the world blurred around them, and his eyes and ears were solely focused on her. "Well, as you can see, I'm not anyone's hostage. And the marriage I ran from was." She steadied herself, her free hand reaching to clasp his arm. "A union between myself and King Nuno." "Your father," he exclaimed, earning him a few odd looks from the other guests despite the lengthy distance. Evelyn clutched his arm tighter and hushed into a whisper. "Please, don't cause a scene." "Well, how else am I supposed to react? Is that even legal in Baldwin? Didn't his counselors reason with him? Surely your brother would have." "Unfortunately, my father's counselors have been taking advantage of his declining mental health." Halcyon tried to speak out, but we're afraid they'll spin the story if he takes further action. They'd label my brother as a usurper despite his rightful claim and the reality that my father is unfit to rule. I think they're waiting for a reason to get rid of my brother once and for all." Artis sighed with frustration. This was as messy as his own father's ascension to the throne. Schemes and lies all around. And the family who you thought would be there for you ended up as the root cause of the problem. "So, your idea is, if you were to marry me, it would put your father and his counselors in a difficult position. They'd have to explain to the rest of Baldwin why our marriage should be cancelled. If your father shouts out his desire for your hand, then it's all over." Evelyn nodded. Baldwin would have no doubt that Halcyon should take over in his place. "And my father's counselors would lose their authority and positions." "Thank you for sharing," Artis uttered after a long pause between them. His thoughts then dwelled on whether he should tell her he knew she was Ally as well. He wanted to ensure she had a comfortable bed and wanted everyone in the castle to realize her importance. However, he understood why she was in hiding and that remaining as his servant gave them time to think about their feelings. Not that he needed much time at this point. He felt the change in his heart and believed he could make the feeling mutual, even if it took a long engagement. By the time they married, Artis was certain they would be in love. "Perhaps now we can speak of simpler things? Like favorite food, color, and whatever else." Evelyn's grip on his arm slackened, and for the remainder of the evening, they spoke of lighter topics. It wasn't until 11 that she remembered the soup. She hadn't meant to stay as long as she did. Slowly, she pulled away from Artis's warmth. His smile dropped, but there was a glimmer of understanding in his eyes. "I'll see you again," he said, knowing he'd see her later that night. "Yes," she promised, thinking of the next event. She turned to flee further into the garden, but before she could, Artis begged her to wait. She obliged and found her hand in his again, but he lifted it to his lips. After he let go, Evelyn found that she wasn't satisfied with that alone. If he wanted love in their marriage, she'd give it. She hadn't thought she would be so lucky, but perhaps that was changing. Evelyn stepped closer, grateful for the extra height her shoes provided, and waited with her eyes closed. She wasn't ready as Ally, but she was now. The moments seemed to drag on, and just as she considered opening her eyes, she felt him leaning in. Their lips met once and then twice. She felt the caution of his movements, taking the light kisses but not pushing for more. When Evelyn opened her eyes, all she could see was him. She smiled and left him one last kiss for good measure before she ran off. Artis stood there, amazed at what he learned. But his desire to be near her is what stunned him the most. Quickly, Evelyn rushed the soup to Artis's room. The event was officially over, and it was time for the king's late dinner. As she entered the room after knocking, she hid her smile when she heard him discussing the events of the night with Prince Lycos and his sister. Lycos rolled his eyes at his cousin's words while Rosemary was very pleased that she had been right about Evelyn's identity. By mistake, Evelyn looked across the table while setting the soup down, her eyes meeting Artis. He trailed off, about to tell them Evelyn's situation, and instead tenderly gazed at her. Then he said, almost in a whisper, "Thank you." Evelyn blinked as she backed away from the table, her job done. "You're welcome, Your Majesty," she muttered, heading off to leave the room before she broke character. As soon as she was gone, Prince Lycos smacked the back of Artis's head. "Now you're complimenting the bear. This girl really has bewitched you. How do you know she didn't lie about being the princess? You should report her presence to the King of Dorian." Artis stood from the couch, anger taking hold of him. "Lycos, don't say another word. There's more to the story. And while I am grateful for your opinion, might I remind you that I am not just your little cousin but your king." He slammed back down into his seat, sighing. A bold voice echoed across the room, "What seems to be the problem?" The entire party stood and bowed as Artis said, "Nothing, father. Lycos was just giving me a hard time, that's all." Artis's mother and father came closer to the three. Snow White smiled as she said, "About the girl, Princess Evelyn?" Registering that his aunt knew more than he did about Evelyn, Lycos stumbled forward. "How did you know about her?" he demanded. Snow White laughed, "I knew from the moment I met her, dear Lycos. And while I'm grateful for you looking after my son, I think he wouldn't blindly follow his heart and leave his logic behind. Additionally, I believe everyone has begun to put the pieces together. The missing princess sighted at Hamilton's Moonlight Walk." Artis's eyes widened, "So rumors have already spread?" Prince Lycos stepped forward, "Then we should contact the King of Dorian before he assumes we kidnapped her. Unless you want him to find out through rumors?" Artis rubbed his forehead, hating that Lycos was right in that regard. Reporting her appearance to Baldwin would avoid conflict. Evelyn most likely hadn't considered that possibility. Whatever the case, he'd rather invite King Nuno than have the Sea King show up unannounced. "All right, send word to Dorian that we have seen their princess." Prince Lycos left the room with a confident stride, filled with purpose. The old King Nathaniel followed him out, wanting to speak with him. Snow White stayed in the room, a concerned look on her face as she watched her husband and nephew depart. Exasperated, Artis went back to the couch and pulled his bowl of soup toward him. He opened the lid, and steam flowed out along with a flavorful smell. He placed his spoon down inside and swirled it around until it knocked into a metallic object. When he pulled the spoon back up, he found the little golden spinning wheel Evelyn left for him. Rosemary plucked it off his spoon, noting the grin on Artis's face. "Another gift?" "I understood the ring, but what's the meaning behind a spinning wheel?" she asked. "Spinning wheels aren't exactly a good omen in Avani." Snow White took a look at the object. "Maybe you should ask Chef Reuben." Artis stared over to another servant filling in for the night who had just arrived to blow out some of the candles. He nodded to the older man, "Please get Chef Reuben and Allie." The servant bowed and headed off to fetch them. While they waited, Artis tried his soup. Again, it was much improved from Chef Reuben's regular recipe. He hoped that Evelyn would be brave enough to come forward as Allie. At the very least, this allowed him to share with her what news had spread. As soon as they stepped into the room, Artis jumped from his seat, lifting the small spinning wheel. He questioned Allie first, but he was careful with his words, though practically everyone in the room was aware of who she really was. Did you not keep an eye on the soup as instructed? Evelyn kept her eyes low. Both Chef Reuben and I were there when I made the soup. Then I placed it under the watch of Chef Reuben as I went to the event. And what did you learn? I learned that Your Majesty does not chase after women. I noticed you let her go, and it appeared she was headed toward the castle. I left a little bit after to go check on the soup. He stared at her, wondering now if she had wanted him to chase her. Indeed, women would continue to confuse him and most likely themselves as well. Forcibly breaking eye contact with the girl he loved, he turned to Reuben. Please tell me you didn't fall asleep. Chef Reuben chuckled. Well, I may have dozed off a few times. Artis shook his head, amazed by the sway Evelyn had on Reuben. Look at him lying to his own king. You are dismissed, Reuben. Chef Reuben bowed to Artis, Rosemary, and Snow White, leaving in a hurry. Evelyn stayed put, and Artis circled around her. Snow White and Rosemary observed, curious as to how this was going to play out. Artis raised a hand to her hood, and as predicted, Evelyn grabbed onto it to protect her identity. His hand fell when he realized it was pointless. He had gained some trust, but clearly not enough. I see, you still don't trust me, he said, his heart aching once he spoke it out loud. Evelyn experienced the same pain because he was right. She had opened a little, but it wasn't enough. She thought a kiss would be promising, yet complete trust was far greater. I have confirmed her identity, and to avoid any accusations that we kidnapped Dorian's princess, a message is being sent to the King of Dorian. I'm certain he will be eager to meet with me. Evelyn quivered and asked shakily, Your Majesty? Yes? May I take my leave? He prayed she didn't mean forever, so he said, Fine, but I want to talk to you in the morning. My plans for the future have been set, and I expect a wedding ceremony in the coming months. This caught her attention, as well as Rosemary and Snow's. Evelyn curtsied and practically bounded out of the room. Out in the halls, Evelyn continued to run along. Doubt spread throughout her. Her father was coming, and the thought still left her trembling. Yet, Artis seemed committed to marriage, so that meant she succeeded, right? No, she wasn't a prophetess who could see the future. That was beyond her. When she reached the kitchen, she stopped before walking in. She stepped back into the corridor and continued along her way. She didn't want to go to sleep. Her dreams couldn't possibly be about a happy ending as uncertainty loomed over her. As she walked down the hall, one of the ladies came across her. Evelyn tried to avoid her, but the lady sneered and called her an animal. It no longer bothered her, not when she was terrified to see her father again. She pressed onward without making a comment to the lady. Soon, she found a dark corner to hide in. She sank down in it, allowing the sorrow to creep out. Knowing her father, he would arrive tomorrow evening. After a good cry, Evelyn boosted herself off the ground. She had to ensure her safety. Evelyn made her way to Jade's room. She knocked twice before the door swung open with a sleepy Jade behind it. When she saw that it was Evelyn, her entire demeanor perked up. She pulled her in and shut the door. How did it go? Jade asked, excited to hear the truth instead of gossip. Unfortunately, Evelyn didn't have time to talk about Artis and their kiss. My father is coming, Jade. And if he spots this coat, then he'll know it's me. But if I don't wear it, then he'll spot me for sure. Jade gasped and ran over to her closet. I have an idea. She pulled out a wig and some makeup. We're going to turn you into Allerlyra. Unfortunately, my magical abilities are lacking, so it might take us all night, but it will be worth it. Thank you, Evelyn breathed out, glad Jade was her best friend. Jade had Evelyn sit down at her vanity desk. "We'll need to come up with some excuse why you have the coat. But hopefully, you can stay away from him altogether." "As Artis's servant, that might be a challenge," Evelyn said evenly, though she was still nervous. "But there might be hope." "What do you mean?" Jade asked, looking at her through the mirror. Evelyn smiled confidently, having formed a plan. She had other allies in the castle aside from Jade. "Don't you worry, but do you think you could add a rash?"